Yeah. Well,
Right.
Henry, what did change Reagan's attitude?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, if you ask me, I think like the most prominent thing that's changing, and it's not just Reagan himself, I think it's the entire administration is really kind of having to deal with the fact that, they have an election coming up in 1984. And if
Right.
you keep talking about fighting and winning nuclear wars and things like this is unpopular. You've got to change your rhetoric. You've even got the Congress calling on you, whether it's even if it's like I was talking before about the congressional resolution, even if it's a watered down resolution and it's not something that like a grassroots activist can be like really like scream and jump up and down about, it's still putting pressure on Reagan. So he's got pressure coming down from the Congress to at least do something about arms control. And he's looking at by 1983, we're talking about 83 before too, the fall of 83. Fall of 83, yeah, you do have all this kind of tension in the world, Able Archer and things like that. The Reagan administration was very concerned about the day after. Reagan gets a private screening of the day after, and he writes in his diary about how the film leaves him greatly depressed. He wants to make sure that we can do something so that we can prevent this sort of thing from happening. That we're not going to have a nuclear war. And there's letters, there's exchanges between him and some of the leaders of the Soviet Union where he does express concerns about the arms race. But Reagan is one of these paradoxical figures, right? So yeah, maybe he does have privately, maybe he does hate nuclear weapons in his heart or something like this. But he's also leading an administration that's building all these first strike weapons, that's responsible for all this loose talk of fighting and winning nuclear war. And I think, but again, you ask me, they're looking at the poll numbers going into 1984 and coming out of the day after, they said to themselves something. I don't remember the exact quote. I have it in the book, but one of his pollster says to them, like, we've dodged a bullet there with the day after because they weren't holding Reagan accountable for some of this nuclear stuff that was happening. They didn't see Reagan as being personally responsible for all of this. But I think there is a significant change in the way that Reagan is campaigning in 1984. Look, he comes out in January of 1984 and he says a nuclear war is unwinnable. We can't fight a nuclear war. We can't win a nuclear war. It's a significant change from like this guy who just a few years ago was saying things about maybe we can recall nuclear weapons after they've been launched, things of that nature. So the rhetoric from the administration significantly changes. When Reagan is on the campaign trail, he's going to Catholic audiences and he's making sure that he avoids anything that would be, maybe challenge the concern within the Catholic Church about nuclear war. He's playing to the strengths. He's going to talk about abortion. He's going to talk about prayer in school. He's not going to talk about anything that might be controversial. When he does kind of get off key and he starts rambling on something that maybe is concerned, the administration, there were several episodes like this where the administration, if he was out giving a press conference, maybe like going towards his helicopter, they would turn on the blades of the helicopter to drown out Reagan so that the press wouldn't start recording things that he would say that might be off the cuff and not completely scripted. So there were a lot of instances like that. They wanted to make sure that they ran that election very close and that they paid attention to what Reagan was saying and what Reagan was going to do. He talks in 1984 that, they create this narrative basically that the United States is back in the world. We're no longer vulnerable. We're no longer this weak nation that came out of the Jimmy Carter administration. The bear is back. We've put our missiles in Europe. We've rebuilt our nuclear muscles. We can flex them now. The problem is the Soviets, right? The Soviets need to come back to the arms control negotiating table. And of course, Reagan was willing to meet with the Soviets. If only they would come back, we could get something done on nuclear arms talks. So I think they created this narrative around nuclear weapons to try to get reelected and to try to counter that nuclear freeze movement. The nuclear freeze movement in 1984 has really kind of attached its horse over to the Mondale campaign. And the Mondale campaign, at least on nuclear weapons and on a nuclear freeze, they were very strong on that. They were strong supporters of the nuclear freeze movement. On a lot of other issues, though, the Mondale campaign might have been the worst campaign in modern political history. I think he comes out and says on right after he's won the nomination that he's going to raise taxes on everyone. Yeah, that's a great plan. That's going to go over well with people. Yeah, I'm going to raise your taxes. Great strategy there. Great thinking. Reagan is very careful to avoid these sort of conflicts. As I like to say, we can hate on the Reagan administration all you want, But these guys were politically savvy. They knew what they were doing. They knew how to counter the nuclear freeze movement. They knew how to co-opt that language. Again, like we were talking about arms control, they knew how to make it look like they were interested in arms control. When even if they're proposing these one-sided proposals, it at least gives the public appearance. And that's, if you go into the archives, you'll see some of this stuff where they're talking about, we're going to give the public the appearance of at least committed to arms control talks.
All right. And
I
then
think Reagan has definitely changed by
Yeah.
'84, and at least rhetorically.
and then along comes our Gorbachev, and we live happily ever after.
Kind of.